Hey, everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you today with another video. We're going to be ranking the Set 2 Legendaries. But before we get started, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now, you heard me right. We're going to be breaking down the Set 2 Legendaries. We're going to be ranking all 12 of them in this video, talking about how viable they are for the current meta, as well as looking possibly into the future on some of these cards, on their potential on the future metas that we may see. All that to say that I'm excited to share with you what I've seen in the first couple weeks of the Rise of the Floodborn meta, and hope you find some of this information helpful. Make sure you leave your comments down in the comment section below, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so we'll go over our categories first. First is format defining. These are the ones that are going to be omnipresent kind of in the meta as it stands. You're either going to need to be playing these cards, or you're going to be needing to play decks that can address these cards. Auto include, these are going to be very playable cards. You're going to see them in most decks that are running the colors that they are in. Maybe not necessarily decks that are centered around those particular legendaries, but are going to be present and powerful cards within those archetypes. Playable, these are going to be cards that you're going to see sparingly throughout the format. These are going to be kind of your role players. Sometimes they're going to be the card that wins the game, but other times they're going to be the card that just kind of ends up either in your inkwell or stuck in your hand if it's not inkable. The situational ones are going to be like the very niche cards that could end up finding homes in the meta, but right now I think they're probably on the outside looking in. Even though we're only 2 weeks into the format, I think a lot of things have kind of been defined and flushed out, which are going to prevent a lot of the cards in the situational category from finding a home in Set 2. And then the unplayable cards, these are cards that I just don't foresee ever having a home in competitive play. They could be very fun cards, they could be very flavorful cards, but I just don't see a meta developing where they are going to be present Set 2, possibly even past Set 2 into the future. So first card up is going to be Alice. I'm going to put Alice here in the playable category. I am still a big fan of Alice, and I do think that this particular card really hasn't been figured out to its max potential as of yet. I know a lot of people focus on her second ability and how challenging it may be to get her all the way up to 10, and that is a real concern, but I'm really more impressed with the fact that, one, she's inkable, so she's never a liability, and she's got that first ability giving all of your characters support, which has a lot of synergy with other cards that are already seeing a lot of play. Cards like the World's Greatest Criminal Mind, she is able to turn on for you very easily by supporting and adding strength to your opponent's characters. Cards like the Queen do double work for her, because when she's questing, she'll add her power, and then her ability will come in and add that +4 as well. She also synergizes well with cards like Pete, who can quest for additional lore whenever his power reaches a certain threshold, and then when he quests, he can throw that additional power right back over onto Alice, creating some very big lore generating turns. I'm not going to say that this card is going to be the sleeper pick for the set, but I do think this card has a ton of potential and is not getting utilized at all right now. So I have her in the playable category. I do want to play around with her a little bit more, but I think this card really does have some potential in the meta. The next one up is going to be the Emo Beast, and I've got him in the auto include section up here for Steel. This card is absolutely an amazing card all the way around. One, it's in Steel, which is one of the best colors in the meta right now, in my personal opinion. He's going to come in with decent stats for a 5-drop, 5 willpower, 2 lore generation. He has the ability Shift 3, which is completely irrelevant now, but if you are familiar with these Set 3 leaks that have come out, we do know he will have a target in Set 3 to come in and be in play on turn 3. Getting him into play even earlier seems even more broken than he is already. This ability to draw a card every turn, if you are not familiar with other card games, is just an absolutely backbreaking effect, especially in a game like Lorcana, where card advantage is at such a premium. And Steel up until set 2 really didn't have any card draw other than a whole new world, which was mostly going to be beneficial for you and your opponent unless you can time it and kind of manipulate it to your advantage. But now with the addition of Beast and Let the Storm Rage On, Steel actually has a decent draw package without having to lean completely on the cards colored that they're paired with. And to top it off, his secondary ability, if they cut off his card draw, basically allows him to challenge into just about any other card in the game right now, which is fantastic consolation prize for his ability being turned off now. I think this card is very, very good. I can't put him in the format defining because there's not really builds that are focused around him and his ability specifically, but he is going to be present in most Steel lists. He also pairs very well with Amber because a lot of times when you're playing Amber, your opponents won't leave damage on characters because they're worried about Rapunzel. He is kind of going to draw that damage to him because they're going to want to shut off his card draw ability, which means that you can follow that up with the Rapunzel, still get your card draw, and still fill him back up to hopefully draw off of him the following turn. Very, very, very big on this card, and even though he's not in the format defining category up here, I think he's one of the better legendaries out of this set. Next up is the Emerald Beast, and I'm going to put him at the top of the playable category here. Now, I was very big on this card whenever they first spoiled this card, with my really only concern was his 6 cost possibly being too slow for the set 2 meta, and I think that's kind of where we are right now. At turn 6, most decks are going to have a way to deal with him or just not have to worry about him, as they are already so well established on what they're trying to do on their side of the board that he really just can't come in and make the impact that I was hoping he would be able to make. Now, that could change if the meta ends up evolving and slowing down a little bit. He could end up emerging as a powerhouse and, bumping up into even this format defining category. I think he does stop the presence of certain decks in the format, but unfortunately, I just don't think he has a home right now other than kind of like that tier 2 semi-competitive deck lists that are out there. Now, when he gets into play and he has the right amount of support, he can absolutely turn a game around by himself. The problem is he has to survive for at least one turn, and on turn 6, that's not guaranteed in the current meta, with especially the large amount of red that is running around, which is what has landed him at the top of my playable list here. Now, the next up, we have Archer Belle, and I'm going to put her in the situational. It's another card, when it was spoiled, I thought was going to be a real centerpiece for the set 2 meta. Unfortunately, she got basically no support at all from anything that was spoiled after she was revealed. We got no shift targets for her in set 2. We got no reckless support for her in set 2. No ward support for her in set 2. Really nothing that can take advantage of her abilities other than just flopping her out there and hoping she stays alive. She's really only ever going to hit on turn 5. If you want to play just in time, you can get her out on turn 3, but she has no real shift targets to get out any sooner than turn 4, and that requires you playing a really bad Belle to get that off anyways. Now, like I said before, with this beast up here in set 3, we do have a shift target for her, which could have her reemerge as a powerhouse in the set 3 meta. But right now, there's just not enough that supports her in the current meta, and that could be a good thing. With her prices right now are probably slowly dropping off. When they kind of reach that bottom level of set 2, I'll probably pick up a couple sets of these because I do think she has a lot of potential in that set 3 environment with her coming in on turn 3. But until that happens, I'll have her in the situational kind of roleplay spot in the current meta. Now, the next one is Donald Duck, and honestly, I could put him in unplayable. I'm going to leave him in situational, though, mostly because he's inkable. My biggest problem with this card is not necessarily that it's a bad card, more so the fact that it just doesn't feel like a legendary card. It doesn't feel like it's really better than maybe even an uncommon. His cost is fairly high to have a base lore generation of 1. His power is really low for a 5-drop, and his willpower isn't exceptionally high for a 5-drop either. All this to get tied in to say then you have to kind of go out of your way to deal damage to him to get his lore cost up. And honestly, like with the amount of direct damage and removal spells that are getting played in the format right now, you can't really take him up very high and expect him to live for more than one turn. I would have liked to have seen this guy either have ward instead of maybe evasive, or have a higher willpower so that we could get him into a realm of questing like reasonably high for the risk reward payoff. But as it stands right now, you might be able to play like a Teeth and Ambitions on him and then quest for 3. And then your opponent's probably going to finish off the last 2 damage with either a Tinkerbell trigger, with Let the Storm Rage On, their own Teeth and Ambitions, or a Grab Your Swords, like any number of cards. And at a 3 lore generator for 5 really isn't that impressive. If it had just been his base stats and he had evasive, maybe. But I just don't see a spot for this guy in the meta currently. If you're playing maybe like Amber Ruby, he could have a home in that deck, but it would really just kind of be for giggles, not necessarily because it would be the best competitive build of that particular deck. All right, next one up is the Fairy Godmother, and I'm going to put her in playable right next to Alice because I think she's kind of in that same category for me with Alice. I think this is a card that is better than its current representation in the meta, and it's just not really getting any testing because they're happy with the Amethyst builds that are currently in the meta, and I don't think they're branching out a ton. I have seen her show up in a few decks on Pixelborn. I have played against her a few times. The fact that she has to quest before her ability is active does hurt, especially since we don't have any good shift targets for her. However, just as we said with the other cards that were on this list that had shift abilities that weren't really being utilized right now, that could change in future sets. That could also change just depending on how the meta shakes out. If we can get her into play early enough and set up like a small board where we're really wanting to challenge favorably, she obviously has the ability to do so. And I think with that ability could end up being a good role player in the meta. But as it stands 2 weeks in, I don't think she has a home in the current environment. All right, next one up is the Dragon Madam Mim, and I'm going to put her kind of right with this Donald Duck. I think I'll put her just above it. The fact that she's inkable keeps her out of the unplayable category. Now, I will say this card is oozing with flavor and synergy for the Madam Mim and Merlin builds that are out there. However, it is really, really difficult to ensure, especially on turn 7, that you are going to have 2 characters in play to return to your hand with this character. Especially since a lot of the Amethyst decks that are getting played right now are also playing Be Prepareds, that are also going to be clearing your side of the board and preventing you from having the 2 characters you're going to need to play her and follow up with her. Top that off with she really has no other protection other than the evasive ability when she's in play. Cards like Dragonfire, cards like Lady Tremaine, cards like the 9-drop Maleficent are all still in the meta and all still take care of her even after you've bounced those 2 cards to your hand. She doesn't really have the protection that you need her to have to stay in play. Now, an evasive character that generates 4 lore with 7 willpower seems like it would be a slam dunk, but unfortunately she's just too hard to get into play consistently. And that's why I have her in that situational. You can play her, you can get her into play, and she will absolutely steal some games from you if your opponent can't deal with her. However, right now the environment is just chock full of answers for her, and the number 1 deck that would probably even consider playing her is playing a sweeper in it as well. So I just don't think she has a home in any of the builds currently, and I doubt she gets more support in future sets than she's got currently. And as such, she's kind of going to end up here in the situational category. All right, next one up is Mufasa. Mufasa's also going to end up, I actually have him at the top end of my playable choices here. This is a card here that a lot of people, I think, have just kind of glossed over because his stats aren't great for a 5-drop. They're in a color that is really, really dense with playable cards too, so finding a home for him can sometimes be tricky. However, the meta right now has just got an absolute ton of sweepers in it and an absolute ton of removal in it, and this guy helps tip the scale back in your favor in those situations. If your opponent goes and plays a Be Prepared, he's going to get banished, and then if that's a character card, you got to put it right back into play, and it's going to be able to quest the following turn or activate for whatever it needs to do the following turn, which can really swing the game very heavily in your favor. I think if we continue to see the dominant amount of red that we are seeing currently in the current meta, where people are just packing full of cards like Lady Tremaines, they're packing full of cards like Maleficents and Be Prepareds, this guy could find a home and be the exact thing that we need to have to tip the scale in our favor in those particular matchups. As such, I've got him in the playable right now, but this guy very easily could shift up into this auto-include for Amber decks in this meta. All right, next up is Namari, and Namari is going to be our first entry into this unplayable category. I don't know what they were thinking when they made this card. This card is only even borderline playable with the help of other cards, namely like the Queen to bump her stats up, or anything really that can increase this power. Because honestly, like the fact that she can attack active characters means next to nothing whenever her power is only 2 and her willpower is only 4. This bodyguard ability is almost useless, as on turn 4, they are most certainly going to be able to swing past a 4 willpower character if they need to, if not address her some other way. And then to top it all off, you know, not even giving you the opportunity to ink her if she's not going to be a key piece in what you're doing on the board at that point in time just seems extra cruel. I can't imagine building a deck in really any environment where I need this exact setup of stuff. It just seems very kind of slapped together almost, like, you know, let's get some flavor for Namari, but maybe not balance her the way that we would normally balance a character for this cost. I don't know if they were just being extra conservative with this ability to challenge active characters. It would seem that that's not the case when we have 7-drop Cinderella, who is an absolute beat stick and can challenge active characters. So I'm not sure really where they were going with this card on design or what they were hoping for on this card design-wise, but I just don't see it ever really filling any roles at all. If you need this ability, I think I would much rather play the action, was it Punch Through, I think, with Wreck-It Ralph on it, than going for this Namari and hoping to kind of sneak something in that way. All right, next one up is Scar, and Scar is actually going to be our first entry into the format defining. Now, I will be the first one to admit, I did not like this card when I initially saw it spoiled, especially since it was spoiled right after we got to see this beast down here, which on paper, this beast looks leagues better than Scar, but unfortunately for the beast and fortunately for the Scar, Ruby is just a much better supported color currently for what these two cards are trying to do. Add on to that fact, this Rush has him come in as like a pseudo one-sided Be Prepared in a lot of situations, which can just be absolutely crushing for your opponent. I've had this guy come in and banish 3 cards on my side of the board completely unexpectedly. I would have much rather had them play a Be Prepared on those turns. And when you can create that kind of one-sided advantage, especially with the Rush ability, and especially with the ability for you to kind of determine when that chain stops, this guy pairs very, very well with the Amber builds, with a Rapunzel to heal him up afterwards and draw cards, and it pairs very well with the Amethyst builds, who can bounce him back to their hand and then replay him the following turn or in future turns if the need arises. His really only big drawback was that he was uninkable and cost 7, which is what I was hung up on early on in the reveals. But we've seen now with the insane amount of card draw that we do have in those particular builds now, that it's very, very easy to reach that threshold very consistently. Even in spite of some of these decks running north of like 24 uninkables, the decks that I play very rarely run into issues finding their curve and being able to drop a card to ink every single turn. This 7 cost is really not as prohibitive as I really thought it was going to be, and this guy is probably going to be, if he's not already, the most played legendary this set, as any red deck is going to be running this guy, as he is just an absolute beat stick to get, as he just allows you to create a one-sided board control that Be Prepared doesn't have. Maybe you are not really far behind on the board advantage and you don't want to clear your whole side of the board. This guy can come down and just take out your opponent's side of the board and leave a lot of your stuff up. He's almost always going to be a 2-for-1, if not a 3-for-1, and is just a card that you absolutely need to, again, no pun intended, be prepared for once your opponent gets to that 7 ink spot. All right, next one up is Sisu. I'm going to put Sisu in this unplayable category as well. And it may seem harsh, and I would say I would normally put her in the situational, but unfortunately the uninkable really is just kind of the nail in the coffin for me on this particular card. Her stats are not good for a 4-drop, especially when you compare her to what other cards that are in Sapphire are doing. I mean, at that same point in the game, you could be playing Flavisham, who is a 1/6, who's basically drawing you 2 cards every single turn. She is a 2/4 who's going to draw you 1 card when she quests, and it's the best 1 card out of the 2 cards rather than just drawing both of them. Now, she doesn't need items to do so, but she also doesn't do anything when she comes into play and has no protection from the swing back, so she's rarely going to activate more than once. Whereas that 6 defense, whereas that 6 willpower on Flavisham will usually keep him alive through several challenges and usually just not make it worth their time to even bother attacking him at that stage in the game. I just don't see where they were coming with this design, especially in this legendary spot. We've got Rapunzel that also is kind of like the card drawing legendary for Amber. She's inkable. She comes out on the same turn. She's got fairly similar stats. She's a 1/5 instead of a 2/4. She quests for 2, but she has an immediate effect of drawing cards, and she's inkable. So this seems kind of like a reverse power creep. Like I said, especially with what Sapphire already got in set 2, I just don't see any reason to play this card whatsoever. If I wanted to do card draw in blue, there is ample card draw in blue without sacrificing the ability to be inkable and having to worry about it staying alive for a whole turn to quest afterward. And then that brings us to our final one on the list. We have Snow White, and I'm going to put Snow White down at the very bottom of situational. Now, this card has a really powerful effect in that she can quest and bring cards back from your discard pile every single turn, which creates a real issue for some of the control decks. She can shift on 4 and then activate that ability that turn. So, in theory, she works the same way that Hades worked in set 1. However, Hades really isn't getting a lot of play right now either, and I don't foresee him making a comeback in this meta. And her ability, while it technically is better than Hades' ability, there's no guarantee that she's ever going to get to activate it. To activate the ability, she has to quest. And yes, she can shift into a character for that like surprise factor on 4 to get the quest off and get the character back. But then that also means that you have to be playing a Snow White character as well. And I don't think any of the Snow Whites, this one included, are really worth a spot in like a tier 1 competitive deck. Now, the Snow White, like 7 Dwarves deck is, you know, a kind of like tier 2, maybe 3 deck that's a ton of fun to play. And I have built because my daughter likes to play the deck. And this card could absolutely find a home in that deck, no problem, as the deck runs very few uninkable cards other than the Snow Whites. So it's not really a big detriment to that. But when you're looking at the current meta, Amber is really being paired with Steel and Ruby, both of which have very high uninkable cards, and I don't see me trading this off for the song package that is in steel, or the removal package like Lady Tremaine and Be Prepared, or Scar that's in ruby. So I just don't think it has a home in like the tier 1 competitive environment. And honestly, long term, I think if I wanted this effect, I would be looking for something more in line with Hades, who I just know when I play him, I'm going to, anytime I have 4 open, have the potential to play him and bring a character back to my hand without any guesswork on if my characters survive long enough for me to quest with them. So there you guys have it. There are all these set 2 legendaries ranked for you. I want to know what your rankings are for these cards as well, so make sure you comment down below what your thoughts on the set 2 legendaries are. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.